Marcus Holt had always been a man who sought solitude in the wild. A biologist and adventurer, he found peace in exploring remote parts of the world, far from the bustle of cities and the distractions of modern life. This time, his destination was a small, isolated island in the Pacific Ocean, a place few had ever set foot on. His mission was simple: to study rare plant species that might hold answers to the mysteries of the Earth's biodiversity. But Marcus never expected that his trip would lead to a discovery that would change everything he knew about the world. It was late in the afternoon when Marcus first spotted something unusual washed up on the shore. At first, he thought it might be a wrecked boat or an animal caught in the tide. But as he drew closer, his heart skipped a beat. It was a woman, lying motionless on the sand. The woman's skin shimmered under the fading sunlight, unlike any human he had ever seen. It was a strange metallic glow, like silver, but with an almost liquid-like quality to it. Her features were delicate and sharp, her face serene but pale, as if she had been unconscious for some time. Marcus, both startled and concerned, rushed to her side. She was cold to the touch, her breathing shallow. Instinct kicked in, and he gently checked for signs of life, relieved to find a faint pulse. He had to get her help. Fast. Lifting her carefully, Marcus made his way back to the small shelter he had set up for himself on the island. Once there, he set her down on a makeshift cot and quickly began to assess her condition. There were no visible wounds, but her body seemed fragile, as if her crash had taken a toll on her in ways that weren't immediately obvious. Marcus had no idea who, or what, this woman was, but his scientific curiosity was already burning. Who was she? How had she ended up here, alone, on a remote island in the middle of the ocean? As the hours passed, Marcus worked to stabilize her, keeping her warm and feeding her small amounts of water. He talked to her, though he didn't know if she could hear him. Slowly, as the sun dipped below the horizon, her eyelids fluttered. Marcus's heart raced. She stirred, and then, with a soft gasp, her eyes opened. They were an unnatural shade, bright violet, almost glowing in the dim light. For a moment, she stared at him with an unreadable expression, as if trying to make sense of her surroundings. She was disoriented, but the confusion in her eyes was quickly replaced by something else: curiosity, wariness, and a faint hint of recognition. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words that came out were completely foreign, a language Marcus had never heard before. He frowned, trying to understand, but all he could do was gently reassure her in English. "It's okay. You're safe now." She blinked, as if the words made no sense to her. The strange, silver-like glow on her skin shimmered in the firelight as she took in her surroundings. Marcus didn't know what to make of it. Was she human? He couldn't imagine a person surviving a crash like the one that must have brought her here, especially on an isolated island like this. But one thing was certain: this was no ordinary woman. There was something otherworldly about her, something that Marcus couldn't yet comprehend. As the night fell, Marcus made a decision. He would help her, no matter what it took. But what was her story? Who was she, and how had she ended up here? Those questions lingered in his mind, unanswered, as he sat by her side, waiting for her to speak, hoping for some clue about the mystery that had just landed on his island. The next few days were a blur for Marcus. He couldn't shake the image of the strange woman with silver-like skin from his mind. After a restless night, she was still weak, but she was no longer unconscious. Her violet eyes flickered open again, and for the first time, she tried to speak in words that Marcus could understand. However, the language was foreign, smooth and melodic, but completely unintelligible to him. The moment he heard her voice, it was clear that she wasn't from Earth. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, realizing that the discovery he'd made was far bigger than he could have ever imagined. Over the following days, Marcus did everything he could to care for her, despite the language barrier. He tried to communicate with gestures, simple hand movements, and facial expressions, hoping she might understand. To his surprise, she responded with small gestures of her own, nodding her head when he gave her food, or pointing to the sky, when she seemed to be asking where she was. Slowly, Marcus learned that her name was Lyra, though it sounded like a soft hum rather than anything he had heard before. Her voice was gentle but carried an air of command, something that hinted at a strength beneath her fragile appearance. While Marcus tried his best to communicate, it wasn't until he found an old journal among his camping gear that he began to piece things together. In the journal, he'd written down every significant observation during his expedition. Flipping through the pages, he saw the drawings of plants and animals, notes on weather patterns, and maps of the island. His eyes landed on the blank page at the back. He decided to try something different. Marcus picked up his pen and began drawing simple symbols, things like circles, arrows, and lines, hoping it might spark some recognition in Lyra. To his relief, Lyra studied the drawings with great focus. She pointed to a circle and made a motion with her hand, almost like tracing the shape in the air. Marcus followed her lead, drawing another circle next to it. Lyra nodded eagerly. They began to form a rudimentary communication system, using pictures and symbols to bridge the gap between their worlds. Slowly, the two of them built a dialogue. Lyra's story began to unfold piece by piece. Through the images and gestures, she revealed that she wasn't just a stranded traveler. She was from the stars. She came from a distant world, one that Marcus could hardly believe existed. She spoke of a place where the sky was darker, the stars brighter, and the technology far beyond anything Earth had ever known. Lyra explained that she had been part of an exploratory mission, one meant to make contact with different planets, including Earth. But something had gone horribly wrong. Her ship had been struck by a mysterious force in space, causing it to crash land on Earth. Lyra couldn't explain much more, her memories fragmented and hazy. But what struck Marcus was the look in her eyes. There was a sense of grief, a sorrow that seemed to weigh on her like a heavy burden. She wasn't just an explorer. She was part of something much larger, and her presence on Earth was far more important than he initially realized. As Lyra opened up about her past, Marcus began to understand that she had been on a mission far bigger than just making contact. She had been sent here with a purpose, one that was tied to a deep, ancient history that spanned across the stars. The realization hit Marcus hard. This wasn't just a strange encounter. This was a life-changing event, one that could alter everything he knew about the universe. He looked at Lyra again, her delicate features marked with the weight of her journey. She was more than just an alien. She was a symbol of a vast, untold story waiting to be uncovered. And Marcus, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, felt a strange sense of responsibility for her. He had to help her. He had to understand what had happened and what came next. But even as he promised to stand by her, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that their story was only just beginning. The more Marcus spent time with Lyra, the more questions he had. Each day, she revealed more about herself, but every answer seemed to raise even more mysteries. Lyra's life seemed like it came from a world far beyond Earth, a place that seemed impossible yet somehow believable. Her stories of her home, her people, and their technology were astonishing, and Marcus listened with growing awe as she explained. Her species, the Nevarians, were an advanced race of explorers who had traveled across galaxies, seeking knowledge and understanding. They had built cities in the stars, their technology so advanced that it seemed like magic to anyone who wasn't from their world. Lyra explained that her people had known about Earth for centuries. They had observed the planet from a distance, studying its history and its inhabitants. But they had stayed hidden, watching humanity's progress without interfering. The Nevarians believed that Earth's people were still too primitive to make contact. But then something changed. Lyra was part of a new initiative, a mission to explore and, if possible, make peaceful contact with humans. She had been selected as one of the first Nevarian explorers to set foot on Earth. The purpose of her mission was not just to study humanity, but to find something much more important. A lost artifact, one that had been hidden on Earth for thousands of years. The artifact was said to hold the key to a lost civilization, one that had once been more powerful than the Nevarians themselves. Lyra's people believed that if the artifact could be found, it would lead to a new era for their species, one where they could finally unlock the full potential of their civilization. But when Lyra's ship was sabotaged, her mission was thrown into chaos. As Lyra told her story, Marcus couldn't help but be fascinated by the sheer scope of it. He had always thought of Earth as just another small planet in a vast universe, but Lyra's words made him realize how much he didn't know. The idea that Earth could have been home to an ancient and advanced civilization was almost too much to comprehend. But what struck Marcus most was the way Lyra spoke about her mission. It wasn't just about exploration, it was personal. She had been chosen for a reason, and now she felt the weight of that responsibility. Her people needed her, and so did the artifact. As the days passed, Marcus noticed that Lyra seemed to grow more distant, lost in thought as she stared at the sky or walked silently along the beach. He could tell she was grappling with something, a sense of guilt, perhaps, or a fear that she wouldn't be able to complete her mission. But Marcus didn't press her. He knew that Lyra needed time to process everything. Instead, he focused on helping her recover, making sure she was physically strong enough to continue their journey. But there was something else that Marcus couldn't ignore. Lyra wasn't just an alien from another world. She was also incredibly intelligent and insightful. Her knowledge of science and technology was far beyond anything Marcus had ever encountered. In the few conversations they had, she shared bits of information about her people's discoveries in space, about energy sources and technologies that could change the future of humanity. The more Marcus learned, the more he realized how much the Nevarians had to offer. They were not just explorers. They were problem solvers, scientists, and inventors on a scale that humans could only dream of. And Lyra, despite being stranded on Earth, carried the weight of that legacy with her. As Marcus sat by the fire one evening, watching Lyra gaze at the stars, he felt a sense of awe and responsibility. This woman, this alien, was not just a stranger. She was part of something much bigger, an ancient story that spanned the cosmos. And somehow, he had become a part of it too. As the days turned into weeks, Marcus and Lyra began to settle into a routine on the island. The initial shock of finding an alien stranded on Earth slowly faded, replaced by a growing sense of connection between them. While Marcus had started this journey to study plants and wildlife, his days had shifted to something much more profound. Now his time was spent caring for Lyra, learning from her, and trying to piece together the mysteries she carried with her. Despite the complexities of communication, Marcus found himself increasingly drawn to her, not just because she was an alien, but because she was incredibly fascinating and intelligent. There was something magnetic about Lyra's quiet presence. She spoke little, but every word she did say was thoughtful and meaningful. Marcus found himself captivated by the way she saw the world, how her perspective as an explorer and a member of an ancient, advanced civilization shaped her view of Earth. She marveled at the simplicity of nature, at the colors of the flowers and the songs of birds that Marcus had always taken for granted. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Lyra spoke for the first time in days. Her voice was soft but steady, as if carefully choosing the words she would say. She had begun to open up more about her past, about the time before she had come to Earth. "We, the Nevarians, have learned much from the stars," she said, her eyes fixed on the flames. "But there is much we have forgotten. Our people were once united, but over time, we divided. Some of us went searching for knowledge, while others sought power. That is why I was chosen for this mission. The artifact I seek holds the key to bringing us together again. It is not just for us. It is for all civilizations, all worlds to be united." Her words lingered in the air as Marcus processed what she had said. The weight of her mission was more profound than he had realized. It wasn't just about discovering Earth or unlocking ancient secrets. It was about healing her fractured people and preventing further division among the stars. Lyra's eyes were distant as she spoke, as though the burden of her mission was always with her, a quiet pressure in the back of her mind. "I'm sorry," Marcus said softly, his voice almost lost in the crackling of the fire. "I didn't know it was so important. I thought you were just stranded here." Lyra glanced at him, her violet eyes reflecting the firelight. There was a flicker of sadness in them, but also gratitude. "I am stranded here," she replied, "but my mission must still continue. No matter what happens, I must find the artifact. It is the only way to bring my people back together." For the first time, Marcus saw her not as an alien, but as a person who carried an enormous responsibility, who had come to Earth not by accident, but with purpose. He realized that her isolation wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. She was alone in a world she didn't understand, carrying the weight of her people's future on her shoulders. Marcus felt a deep sympathy for her, but also something more. Over the weeks they had spent together, he had grown to care for Lyra in ways he couldn't explain. There was an unspoken connection between them, one that had nothing to do with their differences. It was a bond born of shared purpose, shared experiences, and maybe even shared loneliness. As Lyra stared into the flames, Marcus made a quiet promise to himself. He would help her, no matter what it took. He didn't fully understand the significance of the artifact, or the larger story she was a part of, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't leave her alone to face it all. As Marcus and Lyra spent more time together, the island, once a quiet retreat for Marcus, had become the backdrop for an unfolding adventure neither of them had expected. Days passed in a blur of conversations, discoveries, and the occasional quiet moment of reflection by the fire. The mystery of Lyra's origins and mission only deepened with each passing hour, and Marcus found himself becoming more and more invested in her story. One afternoon, while Marcus was gathering some supplies from the nearby forest, he noticed something unusual. A faint, low hum echoed through the trees, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very air. He paused, his instincts as a biologist kicking in, trying to analyze what could be making the noise. It was too steady to be the wind, too precise to be an animal. He turned his head in the direction of the sound, his eyes scanning the horizon. Then he saw it. Through the dense canopy of trees, something glittered in the distance. His heart skipped a beat. It was faint at first, but as the sound grew louder, he could make out the outline of a ship. Lyra's ship, the one she had crashed on Earth. It wasn't far from where they had set up camp, hidden deep in the forest, concealed by thick undergrowth and trees. Without hesitation, Marcus rushed back to the camp, his mind racing. Lyra had been reluctant to speak about the ship ever since the crash, but Marcus knew she had been struggling with the idea of returning to it. He found her sitting near the fire, staring into the distance, her eyes clouded with thought. When he approached, his voice was urgent but calm. "Lyra, I think I found your ship." Her eyes snapped up to meet his, a flash of recognition and surprise crossing her face. She stood quickly, brushing past him. "Where? Show me." Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a mix of excitement and anxiety that Marcus couldn't ignore. They made their way through the forest together, the sound of the humming becoming louder with every step. Lyra moved with purpose, her strides long and confident, despite her previous weakness. It was as if the proximity to her ship had awakened something inside her, a renewed sense of determination. When they reached the ship, Marcus was in awe. The vessel was unlike anything he had ever seen, sleek, metallic, and surrounded by strange glowing symbols. The ship's exterior shimmered in the dim light, its surface reflecting the trees and sky in a way that made it almost seem like part of the landscape itself. But it was clear that the ship had been damaged. The hull was cracked in places, and it had clearly taken a harsh landing. Lyra approached the ship cautiously, her fingers brushing lightly against the side, as if greeting an old friend. She closed her eyes for a moment, lost in thought, before turning to Marcus. "This ship, it holds everything I need to complete my mission," she said quietly, her voice filled with a deep sense of longing. "The artifact is inside, but I can't do this alone. I need your help." Marcus felt a surge of excitement. He had known this moment would come, but hearing Lyra's plea, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes, made everything feel more real. He had promised to help her, and now that promise seemed more important than ever. But there were still so many unanswered questions. What kind of artifact was she looking for? What did it hold, and why was it so crucial to her people's future? As they stood there in the shadow of the alien ship, Marcus realized that their journey was about to take a dangerous turn. The stakes were higher than he had imagined, and the mysteries surrounding Lyra's mission were far more complex than he could have ever anticipated. But one thing was clear: he would stand by her side, no matter what lay ahead. The following days were filled with urgency. Marcus and Lyra worked tirelessly to prepare for what they both knew would be a risky venture, exploring the damaged alien ship. Lyra's determination was unwavering, and Marcus couldn't help but admire her resilience. Despite the challenges she had faced, from the crash to her time on Earth, she seemed driven by something greater than herself. It was more than just finding the artifact. It was about saving her people, restoring their unity, and ensuring the future of the Nevarian race. Marcus had never imagined that his quiet life on the island would lead to such an extraordinary situation. As a biologist, he had studied the natural world, not intergalactic missions or ancient artifacts. But as he watched Lyra prepare for the journey, the seriousness in her eyes made it clear that there was no turning back. Whatever was inside that ship was the key to unlocking a chapter of history that had been buried for millennia, and he was now a part of it. They spent hours searching through the dense forest for the best path to the ship, carefully avoiding the broken terrain around the wreckage. Marcus kept his eyes on Lyra, noticing how her movements had become more fluid, her strength returning. She was no longer the fragile, injured woman he had found on the beach. Instead, she was the embodiment of focus, driven by an internal purpose that Marcus couldn't fully comprehend. She had told him little about the artifact itself, only that it was hidden inside the ship and that it held the potential to change everything. When they finally reached the ship, Marcus felt a sense of awe unlike anything he had experienced before. The ship wasn't just advanced. It was a work of art, its sleek curves and glowing panels unlike anything found on Earth. There was a strange energy around it, a hum that vibrated in the air. As Lyra led him toward the entrance, Marcus felt a rush of anticipation mixed with nervousness. The unknown lay just ahead, and neither of them could predict what would happen once they stepped inside. Lyra paused before the ship's entrance, her hand hovering over a panel on the side. "This is it," she said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet reverence. "The ship's systems are damaged, but I can still access the main controls." Marcus watched as she tapped the panel with a series of precise movements. The ship responded, its lights flickering to life, casting an eerie glow in the otherwise dark forest. The entrance slowly opened, revealing the ship's interior, a mix of metallic surfaces, glowing symbols, and technology that was beyond anything Marcus could even begin to understand. Inside, the air smelled different, charged, almost electric. It felt as though the ship was alive, its heartbeat pulsing through the walls. Lyra moved with confidence, guiding Marcus through the narrow corridors. Her footsteps echoed softly, a reminder that this was no ordinary ship. It was a relic from the stars, a vessel that had traveled across galaxies, carrying knowledge and secrets that Marcus could never have imagined. As they moved deeper into the ship, Lyra's expression grew more intense. There was something here, something hidden, that she had been seeking for so long. Marcus couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. He had come so far with her, and now they were on the cusp of discovering something that could change everything. "I can feel it," Lyra murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "It's close." They rounded a corner, and there it was, a pedestal in the center of a large chamber, bathed in soft, golden light. On the pedestal lay an object wrapped in ancient, glowing energy. It was the artifact. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the thing that could change the future of two worlds. As Marcus and Lyra stood before the glowing pedestal, The weight of the moment felt almost unbearable. The artifact, bathed in the soft golden light, seemed to pulse with an energy of its own. It was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen, an object that seemed both ancient and alive, as though it contained the power of an entire civilization. Lyra's eyes were fixed on it, her face a mixture of awe and anticipation. This was what she had been searching for, the key to unlocking the future of her people. Marcus could feel the tension in the air as Lyra stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate. She was close now, closer than she had ever been to completing her mission. But something in the atmosphere had shifted. The air around them felt charged, almost electric, and a low hum resonated from the artifact itself. Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew that what happened next could change everything, but he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. Lyra reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she touched the surface of the artifact. As her fingers made contact, the humming sound intensified, and the light around the object flared brighter for a brief moment. For a second, Marcus thought the whole ship might explode, but the intensity quickly subsided, leaving only the quiet hum of energy in the air. Lyra's face was unreadable as she studied the artifact, her mind racing with what she might need to do next. It's activating," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with awe. She stepped back slightly, as if giving the artifact space to fully come to life. "This is it, Marcus. This is the moment I've been waiting for." Marcus watched, fascinated and nervous, as the object slowly began to shift. The light around it seemed to ripple, like waves across water, and strange symbols began to appear on its surface, symbols that Lyra recognized immediately. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, Marcus saw a flicker of something other than resolve in her expression. There was fear. Fear of what this moment meant, fear of the unknown, and perhaps fear of the power this artifact held. The chamber around them seemed to pulse with energy, and the walls of the ship began to vibrate gently. The floor beneath their feet shifted slightly, as if the entire ship was awakening, reacting to the artifact's activation. Marcus glanced at Lyra, who stood frozen, her hand still hovering just above the artifact's surface. It's changing," Lyra murmured, her voice filled with disbelief. "This is more than I ever imagined." Marcus felt a surge of panic. He didn't understand what was happening, but the changes in the ship were becoming more pronounced. The walls were shifting, and the lights that had once been dim were now glowing brighter, almost blindingly so. Something was happening in this ship, something powerful, and they had no idea if it was going to be dangerous or transformative. Suddenly, the chamber's temperature dropped, and a cold wind swept through the room, stirring the air. The artifact began to pulse in rapid succession, sending a shockwave through the entire ship. Marcus stumbled backward, nearly losing his balance. Lyra's eyes were wide with shock, and for the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. "Marcus, we need to leave. Now." Her voice was urgent, and without waiting for his response, she grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the door. The ship was reacting violently to the activation of the artifact, and Marcus had no idea what kind of consequences they were facing. As they ran through the hallways, the ship seemed to shake beneath their feet, and the lights flickered as if on the verge of failing altogether. They had reached the ship's exit, but just as they were about to step outside, the ground beneath them cracked. The entire ship groaned, its walls bending in on themselves as if under some unseen pressure. The artifact's light flared once more, sending out a pulse that shook the air. Marcus felt his heart race. Whatever was happening, they had to get away from the ship, and fast. As the ship groaned and shook, Marcus and Lyra sprinted toward the exit, the air around them thick with tension. The glowing pulse from the artifact reverberated through the ship's walls, shaking everything in its path. The ground beneath their feet cracked open, sending pieces of the floor tumbling into the darkness below. Lyra's grip on Marcus tightened as she pulled him faster, her face pale with fear. "We have to get out now," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Marcus could barely keep up as the ship seemed to come alive around them. The lights flickered, and the walls shifted, as if they were caught in some kind of storm. They rounded a corner, barely avoiding falling debris, and reached the entrance just as the ship's outer doors began to close. The hum of the artifact echoed behind them, and Marcus could feel the pressure building, like something was about to snap. With one final push, they made it through the doors, tumbling out into the open air. The ship, now half destroyed, seemed to be collapsing on itself. A bright flash of light erupted from the entrance as the energy from the artifact reached a peak, illuminating the forest for miles. Marcus shielded his eyes, feeling the heat from the explosion that followed, but Lyra had already pulled him to safety, dragging him into the dense foliage. They lay there, panting heavily, watching in shock as the ship trembled and buckled in on itself. The sky above them was filled with swirling lights, and the ground seemed to quake with the force of the destruction. It felt like the entire world was shaking, like the earth itself was responding to the artifact's power. After what seemed like an eternity, the ship's final explosion echoed through the night, a deafening roar that reverberated across the island. For a moment, everything was silent. The only sound was the rush of their breathing, and the crackling of the fire they had left behind. Marcus turned to Lyra, his heart still racing. She was staring at the remnants of the ship, her face a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. "Lyra, what just happened?" Marcus asked, his voice shaky. "That was insane." Lyra remained silent for a long time, her eyes glued to the spot where the ship had once stood. "I didn't know it would be like this," she said quietly. "I thought activating the artifact would unlock its power, but I never imagined it would cause this kind of destruction." She looked down at her hands, her expression filled with guilt. "I should have been more prepared for the consequences. The artifact, it's not just an object. It's a force, something that holds the power of my people, and when it was activated, I didn't understand what would happen." Marcus watched her, feeling a mix of sympathy and concern. He could see how torn she was, how deeply the consequences of her actions weighed on her. This wasn't just about saving her people anymore. The artifact had become something far bigger, something that had the potential to destroy everything around it. "We need to figure out what to do next," Marcus said, his voice steady but urgent. "We can't let all of this be for nothing. There's got to be another way." Lyra nodded, her eyes now focused on him. "You're right. The ship may be gone, but the mission isn't over. We still have a chance to save my people, but now it's even more dangerous. I need you, Marcus. I need your help more than ever." Marcus swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. They had just escaped a disaster, but Lyra's mission was far from over. And whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't walk away. He had already crossed a line, and there was no turning back now. The sun was just beginning to rise when Marcus and Lyra found themselves standing at the edge of the forest, staring at the destruction left in the wake of the ship's collapse. The air was thick with smoke, and the faint glow from the artifact's final pulse still lingered in the sky like a fading star. The island, once peaceful and serene, was now scared by the power of something neither of them could fully comprehend. Lyra stood silently beside him, her eyes narrowed, as if weighing the magnitude of what had just happened. The ship was gone, the artifact destroyed, but the mission was far from over. Her people, the Nevarans, were still out there, struggling, lost, and in desperate need of help. The artifact had been their last hope, but now they were left with nothing but the ruins of an ancient power that had been unleashed too soon. "I never wanted this," Lyra finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "I thought that if I could just find it, everything would fall into place. But now, I see how dangerous it is, how dangerous I've made it." Marcus turned to her, his heart heavy with understanding. He knew she hadn't meant for any of this to happen. Her desire to save her people had led her down a path she couldn't have predicted. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, trying to offer some comfort. "You didn't know," he said softly. "You were trying to help. You're not responsible for this." Lyra's eyes met his, and for the first time, she seemed vulnerable, as if the weight of her mission had finally caught up to her. "But I should have known. I should have been more careful. I thought that if I could just harness his power, I could save my people. But now," she trailed off, her gaze returning to the wreckage. Marcus stood there for a moment, thinking, his mind racing with ideas. He had come to care for Lyra in ways he hadn't expected. Her mission, once so clear-cut in his mind, was now shrouded in uncertainty. But he knew one thing for sure: they couldn't give up now. They had come this far together, and whatever it took, he would stand by her side. "We're not done," Marcus said firmly. "The artifact might be gone, but your mission isn't. There's still a way to save your people. We just need to figure it out." Lyra looked up at him, a flicker of hope rekindling in her eyes. "You really think so?" she asked, her voice softer than before. Marcus nodded. "I do. We've come this far. We can't stop now. We'll find another way. Together." They stood there for a while, letting the words sink in, before Lyra finally spoke again, her voice filled with renewed determination. "Then we'll keep going. I don't know what comes next, but we can't let everything we've been through be for nothing. We have to find a way to finish what we started." Marcus smiled slightly, feeling the weight of their bond, forged through shared struggle and mutual understanding. They were a team now, and no matter what came next, they would face it together. As the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, they set off into the unknown, side by side, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The journey was far from over, but now, with Lyra's resolve and Marcus's unwavering support, they were stronger than ever. And the world, still reeling from the shock of the artifact's power, would soon know that humanity was capable of far more than anyone had ever imagined.